Okay, so now we're going to talk about statistics, the fun stuff. The leading causes. How do people become homeless or live in housing poverty? Homelessness and also housing poverty are crises in many communities. One that demands urgent action at the federal, state, and local level. The main reason people become homeless is because they cannot find housing they can afford. Other factors that we hear about a lot that do contribute to homelessness include stagnant wages, poverty, chronic health conditions, mental illness, lack of affordable health care, lack of social support services and funding for those services, substance use disorders, domestic violence, natural disasters, and systemic inequality and racism. And until we find the end to the affordable housing crisis for America's poorest and middle class households, even the best efforts to end homelessness will fall short. Leading causes, we're going to talk about first unaffordable housing. At least 568,000 people will experience homelessness in America on any given night. Many more are on the cusp, living in doubled up or tripled up housing and paying far too much of their income to keep a roof over their heads. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the US has a shortage of almost 7 million rental homes that are affordable and available to extremely low income renters whose household incomes are at or below the poverty guidelines of 30% of their area median income. Nationwide, that comes out to being there's only 37 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 extremely low income renter households. And so there's a shortage in every state and every major metropolitan area, including Washington, D.C. Overall, 71% of low income people pay at least half of their limited income on rent, leaving few resources to put groceries on the table, cover medical costs, and meet their basic needs. These other households are at a higher risk for evictions and in worst case homelessness when they face an unexpected financial shock. They keep saying that a lot of us, it just takes one accident or illness that can put us out on the streets. And leading causality of housing and poverty in Michigan, we have a lack of affordable housing right here at home. It says recently foreclosures have also increased the number of people who are experiencing homelessness. The National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates in 2017 the housing wage is $21.21 per hour, exceeding the $16.38 hourly wage earned by the average renter by almost $5 an hour. That greatly exceeds the wages earned by low income renter households. In fact, the hourly wage needed for renters hoping to afford a two-bedroom rental home is $13.96 an hour higher than the national minimum wage of $7.25. And as you can see, it shows that the minimum wage here is too low to afford the affordable housing across the state of Michigan. And it says each week, a person making $9.65 an hour would have to work 61 hours just to afford a modest one-bedroom home at the fair market rent. The human costs to housing and poverty, threat of eviction. In Michigan, tenants face threats of eviction. In 2018, more than 191,500 eviction cases were filed, the equivalent of one eviction case for every 6 rental units. And basically, it talks about 37% of the counties in Michigan have eviction filing rates of over 9.5%, the equivalent of one eviction case for every 10 rental units. And these filings are harmful. Even if they don't result in evictions, they can result in additional costs and fees to the tenant and leave records that make it difficult for them to rent in the future. And then if you look at it, there's a lot of racial inequality, gender inequality compared to other groups. African-American women, families with children, and Hispanic households in mostly white neighborhoods experience a disproportionately high number of evictions. Victims of domestic violence also appear to face elevated rates of eviction after controlling for household and neighborhood factors due to nuisance citations generated by these incidents of domestic violence. Poverty and employment, homelessness and poverty are inextricably linked. Poor people are frequently unable to pay for housing, food, childcare, healthcare, and education. Difficult choices must be made when limited resources cover only some of these necessities. A lot of us know how that is. You have to make the hard choices. Often it is housing, which absorbs a portion of income that must be dropped. If you are poor, you're essentially an illness, accident, or paycheck away from living on the streets. And then we're looking at lack of employment opportunities. As we know, the unemployment subsidies and the unemployment increase for the pandemic were cut, but unemployment hasn't dropped drastically like they were saying. And so even if somebody can get back up, bounce up right now, who's not getting any kind of unemployment supports and find work, that does not mean that it's an automatic escape from poverty. And then there's the decline for public assistance. We know this with our jobs. The declining value and availability of public assistance is another source of increasing poverty and homelessness. Many families are leaving welfare to struggle to get medical care, food, and housing as a result of the loss of benefits, low wages, and unstable employment. Additionally, most states have not replaced the old welfare system with an alternative that enables families and individuals to sustain themselves when work is not available or possible. And it said almost 16 million households needing federal rental assistance do not receive it due to funding limits. Domestic violence is a major cause. It's a battered women who live in poverty are also often forced to make choices between abusive relationships or homelessness. National estimates are that roughly 50% of all women who are homeless report that domestic violence was an immediate cause of their homelessness. And 80% of homeless mothers with children have previously experienced domestic violence. And HUD's most recent data reveals that over 230,000 children living in shelters have been exposed to traumatic and long-term effects of domestic violence at some point. Leading cause is lack of affordable health care. Many people without health insurance have low incomes and do not have the resources to pay for health services. They make just enough money not to get Medicaid, but they make too much money not to get Medicaid, not enough to pay for health insurance. And a serious injury or illness could result in insurmountable expenses for hospitalizations, tests, and treatments, as well as loss of income. And for families and individuals already struggling to pay the rent, a serious illness or disability can start a downward spiral into homelessness. And several surveys have shown that medical debt is one of the top 5 reasons people report being homeless. And then being unable to pay for their basic necessities like food, heat, and housing, and medical bills. You're looking at those are the main reasons why people are reporting that they're unable to find housing. Mental illness. Basically, and we all know that it can impact every area of your life, especially an untreated mental illness. And numerous studies have reported that approximately 1/3 of homeless persons have a serious mental illness, mostly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. The percentage is higher among those who are chronically homeless and among homeless women, and it is lower among homeless families. Additionally, according to Psychology Today, 25% of the American homeless, 140,000 individuals, were seriously mental ill at any given point in time, compared to the 6% of the American population that have had the same serious mental illnesses. So, I mean, 45% of the homeless, 250,000 individuals have had any mental illness. The combination of mental illness, substance abuse, and poor physical health makes it difficult to maintain employment and residential stability. Another leading cause is substance abuse and co-occurring disorders. The relationship between substance use and experiences of homeless is very complex. Most people think, well, you're out on the street because you're doing drugs and you can't afford to pay anything else. That's not always the case. It says while rates of substance use are disproportionately high among those experiencing homelessness, homelessness cannot be explained by substance use alone. So you can't just be like, well, that guy's, buying drugs instead of paying for rent. The use of substances alone does not necessarily signal addiction or harmful or problematic lifestyles. In addition, many people who are addicted to substances never experience homelessness, but an individual that is experiencing housing instability, often due to low income, has an increased risk of losing their housing if they do use substances. Once out on the streets, an individual with substance use issues has very little chance of getting housing as they face insurmountable barriers to obtaining health care, including substance use treatment and recovery supports. Of those people who are homeless and in substance use treatment, 68% of men and 76% of women reported experiencing a trauma-related event. Cognitive impairment also increases the risk for homelessness. Up to 80% of people who are homeless show some sign of cognitive impairment, which impacts their ability to learn new skills. Co-occurring medical conditions like HIV, AIDS, hepatitis B and C, cardiovascular conditions, dental problems, asthma, diabetes, and other medical problems are more prevalent among people who are homeless and individuals with substance use disorders compared to those who are housed. Incarceration, the revolving door of homelessness. We find that people experiencing cycles of incarceration and release, otherwise known as the revolving door of incarceration, are just as more likely to be homeless. People who have been to prison just once experience homelessness at nearly a rate of 7 times higher than the general public, but people who have been incarcerated for more than once have rates 13 times higher. The average is 10% the chance is 10% higher for someone who has been to prison to become homeless. Previous research has shown that formerly incarcerated people are most likely to become homeless in the period shortly after their release. So they get released from prison and trying to rebuild their life, and here you go. Our data supports this research. We find that, and this is from the Prison Policy Initiative, that people who spent 2 years or less in the community were more than twice as likely to be homeless than those who had been out of prison for 4 years or longer. So who's at most at risk for homelessness? The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2019 annual homeless assessment report to Congress reveals that an estimated almost 568,000 were identified homeless on a single night in 2019. This presents a 2.7 increase over 2018. And of course, we're going to see how the pandemic has impacted those numbers when more recent research is available. The increases during this period were particularly striking among the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. This population rose by 8.7%, including increases of 15% among unsheltered women and 43% among people who identify as transgender. Other populations that increased included the total number of people including chronic homelessness, so more than one time out on the living out on the streets, and those who experience homelessness as individual adults. The report actually reflects deep and persistent racial inequities among the people who experience homelessness. African Americans accounted for 40% of all the people experiencing homelessness in 2019, despite being only 13% of the US population. And Michigan's not much better. In 2019, 61,832 individuals experienced homelessness in Michigan, according to the Ending Homelessness in Michigan annual report. Families with children account for nearly 50% of those who experienced homelessness, and 3,847 are youth ages 18 to 24, and they've also, the number of homeless persons considered chronically homeless in 2019 was 6,625, and nearly 50% of those were Black. More than 40% of the homeless population has had a long-term mental or physical health condition. Formerly incarcerated individuals are 10 times more likely to experience homelessness than the general population here in Michigan. The average monthly income for a person experiencing homelessness is $662, which is a common misconception that they have no money at all. And then you can see the breakdown off to the side if you love all the charts and graphs. Unaccompanied minors, which are children that are under the age of 18 without parents, seniors, we have a large senior population of over the age of 55 that are homeless. The chronic homeless veterans, 3,333. Children and families, adults and families, and singles. Who is at most risk for homelessness in Genesee County and Flint? January 2020, the Genesee County Continuum of Care agencies and communities who work together with the homeless population reported 349 homeless individuals. The latest reports that are rough estimates are over 400 now. Genesee County differs from the national and state figures as families with children account for only about 30% of those experiencing some form of homelessness in 2019. In Genesee County, men make up 58.1% of the homeless population. Race in Genesee County, 73.3% of the population are white, 19.6% are Black, 3% are multiple races, 2% are Hispanic, and less than 1% are Asian. However, the homeless demographics broken down by race are 44% white, 42% Black, 14% Hispanic, 11% are multiple races, and 0% are Asian. Chronically homeless, 13.8% of the homeless population in Genesee County are considered to be chronically homeless versus the state's 10%. Who's most at risk for homelessness? Back to race, racial inequality, structural inequality through the decades. While the proportionate representation of Caucasians is higher among the older and younger homeless persons, African Americans are still overrepresented among older homeless persons in the United States. Homelessness disproportionately impacts people of color. African American households make up 13% of the country's population, but represent 40% of the people experiencing homelessness. This is another chart from HUD's point in time demographic data that shows that how many people per 10,000 or each race are homeless, and you're looking at 1%, 4 Asian for every 100,000 or 10,000 people, 11 white for every 10,000 people, 20 Hispanic or Latinx for every 10,000 people, 54 African American people per 10,000 are homeless. Now, in case you noticed in the second chart at the bottom, Native Americans aren't even represented on chart 2 because there's no consistent data or information on Native populations and that are specific to their housing needs. So going back to Michigan, according to the national data and the annual homeless assessment report, Blacks made up 13% of national population, but again, account for 40% of people experiencing homelessness. In Michigan, it's 52%. Yeah, let that sink in. 14% of Michigan's non-homeless population are Black, but 52% of our homeless population in Michigan are Black. So that's massive. And it says that even though the overall numbers dropped from 2018 to 2019, Endling Homeless Michigan report illustrates deep disparities. And also families with children account for 50%. And then we have the increases in youth. And basically, a quote is, what we're seeing is homelessness takes many shapes and forms. And while we've made positive strides overall and within some subpopulations like veterans, youths, and families with children, there's still a lot of work to be done to provide safe, affordable housing for all Michiganders. We are not there yet. So talking about the children and youth, the subpopulation of youth in Michigan, 18 to 24, youth who face homelessness are vulnerable to serious threats, including sexual exploitation, untreated mental health disorders like physical victimization, and physical victimization. These youth are more likely to interact with police and less likely to obtain a high school diploma. In fact, homelessness during adolescence is the #1 predictor of chronic homelessness in adulthood. Youth who are aging out of our foster care system, involved in the juvenile justice system, identify as LGBTQ, or are Black or part of the Latinx community are more likely to experience one or more instances of homelessness between the ages of 12 to 24. Nearly a quarter of youth in the foster care are at age 17 in Michigan experience at least one instance of homelessness by age 19. That number increased to 33% by age 21 and a half. The human cost to youth in Michigan. The Michigan Public School data reported in the U.S. Department of Education during the 2018 and 2019 school year, it shows that an estimated 34,853 public school students experienced homelessness over the course of the year. Of that total, 675 students were unsheltered, 4,922 were in shelters, 2,502 were in hotels and motels, and 26,754 were doubled up. Michigan has one of the largest populations of homeless students in the United States. It says in 2015 and 16 school year, Michigan ranked 6th among the states that were the most homeless by students, had the most homeless students. By comparison, Michigan ranked 10th for overall student enrollment. And then it says nearly half of children facing homelessness were chronically absent last school year, compared with only 19% of housed children. Likewise, only 57% of high school seniors identified as homeless graduated in 4 years, while 81% of housed seniors attained that same accomplishment. Who's at risk in Michigan? Veterans. In 2019, there were 3,333 veterans that were homeless in Michigan. And then HUD found that that increased 6.7% over January of 2019, where there were reported 3,333 veterans. 76% of homeless veterans were living with a disability. Historically, national policy failures have meant that veterans are more likely to experience homelessness. 21 out of every 10,000 veterans were homeless. This number is slightly higher than the overall homeless rate of 17 out of every 10,000 Americans. Who's at risk? Seniors. Adults aged 65 and older who are homeless have a higher prevalence of unmet needs for substance use and mental disorder treatment compared to their younger adult counterparts. And of course, in Michigan reported 8,362 homeless seniors, people over the age of 55. 30% reported being homeless for more than 1 year, and 50% of homeless seniors were Black. Older homeless persons are likely to come from a poor, impoverished backgrounds and spend their lives in similar economic condition. More than 3/5 work in unskilled or semi-skilled occupations with current income of roughly 1/2 of the poverty level. This is how we treat our seniors and our elders. Consistent with reports of high prevalence of childhood disruptive events among younger homeless persons, about 1/5 of older homeless persons have had disruptive events such as a death of parents or placement in foster care. The disabled. According to the CDC, among adults, 26.7% of the US population had a disability, whereas an estimated 42.8% of sheltered homeless adults had a disability. A disability, particularly one relating to substance abuse or mental health issues, can make it difficult to work to afford housing. In Michigan, 29% of the state adult population is living with a disability. However, nearly half, 44% of all Michigan homeless population are living with a disability. The chronic homeless subpopulation. People who are chronically homeless have spent at least 1 year out of the past 3 as homeless and have had a long-term disabling condition. In 2019, 6,625 homeless persons were considered chronically homeless. Nearly 50% of those were Black. The average age of a person experiencing chronic homelessness is 45 years old. Since being chronically homeless requires a disabling condition, it is often later in life that such a condition is significant enough to affect their ability to maintain long-term housing and work. Only 32% of chronically homeless persons have an income at program entry, with an average income amount of $993. The most common source is SSI, which is what I work with through SOAR. The LGBTQ community population suffers from high rates of drug and alcohol abuse. They also suffer from minority stress which stems from internalized feelings of cultural and social exclusion and fuels their chemical dependency. Unfortunately, members of the LGBTQ community also have 120% higher risk of homelessness. Then if you're looking at the national stigma, unable to hold a job, unable to find a job, 45% of youth have also identified with a disability, the majority, 80%, having mental health conditions. The number of youth reporting a disability has been steadily increasing over the past 3 years. More members of this community face depression, PTSD, anxiety, suicidal ideations, and self-medicating with substances when homeless. According to Psychology Today, the homeless LGBTQ Americans have the highest number of illicit drug use. And we're looking at the LGBTQ youth. For youth and adults alike, losing a job can be a pathway to homelessness, and discrimination in the hiring process can prolong one's experience with homelessness. Homeless lesbian women and lesbian women in general report higher numbers of alcohol abuse in response to the internalized disorders and minority stress. When homeless, homosexual Americans are more subjected to violence and sexual assault compared to their heterosexual counterparts. In particular, homelessness is more common in the transgender community. Members of the transgender community often struggle with housing and job discrimination. LGBTQ youth in foster care may be adversely affected by inappropriate or frequent placement changes. Studies show that placement instability, meaning being moved from one place to another, especially if it stems back to their sexual orientation or gender identity, the instability may preclude the development of permanent connections to supportive adults and limit the receipt of life skills training and interfere with school completions. What is the cost of homelessness? The cost to taxpayers, aside from the people who are going through and suffering the homelessness, the cost to taxpayers, as demonstrated through the Care Coordination Project, the Housing First program, the direct cost to taxpayers is an average of $62,473 for high users of the system while homeless, whereas the average post-housing cost is estimated at $19,767, resulting in annual cost reduction of $42,706 for those who remained housed. Healthcare costs accounted for 53% of expenditures for homeless people. Serious healthcare issues both cause homelessness and result from homelessness. Healthcare issues such as addiction, psychological disorders, HIV/AIDS, and a host of ailments require long-term consistent care. Homelessness inhibits this care, as housing instability often detracts from regular medical attention, access to treatment, and recuperation. The inability to treat serious medical conditions can aggravate a person's health issues, thus contributing to cost. Homelessness is expensive. It takes a toll on the economy, environment, healthcare, criminal justice systems, and the lives of our fellow human beings. We cannot afford for homelessness to continue. Thank you.